No one knows exactly what Crowley learned from Moreau. But when Crowley returned to Texas a year later, he was different. Stronger, colder, hungrier. Some said he carried books written in languages older than the Bible. Others claimed they saw him in the desert under a blood moon, kneeling before a circle carved into the earth, chanting to something that wasn't there. Or maybe something that was. Jonas had heard fragments of these stories, but hearing them in whispers was different from sitting inside Crowley's saloon, staring at his steady, unblinking eyes. Something about him wasn't right. He wasn't just dangerous. He felt wrong. Clara Boyd, the newlywed bride, shifted nervously at her table, clutching her husband's hand. "I don't like this place," she whispered. "Sam, I don't like him." Crowley's ears twitched, and without looking at her, he smiled. "Funny thing about fear," he said softly. "Smells just like rain to me." Samuel Boyd went pale and pulled his wife closer. But Crowley had already turned away, busying himself behind the bar. Jonas noticed something strange. Crowley wasn't mixing drinks. He was arranging small glass vials in neat rows, each labeled with strange symbols, each filled with dark, viscous liquid. Deputy Eli finally broke his silence. "You oughta leave," he muttered to Jonas. "Now, before he notices you watching." Jonas narrowed his eyes. He's already noticed. That's when the wind howled louder and the lamps flickered violently. The room went half dark for a heartbeat, and Jonas swore he saw something moving behind Crowley, a shape on the wall, long and twisted, bending at angles no human body could. When the light steadied again, Crowley was alone. Jonas blinked, hand tightening on his revolver. "What the hell are you?" he muttered under his breath. Crowley turned sharply as, if he'd heard him from across the room, their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, Jonas saw something ancient buried behind Crowley's gaze. Not madness, not evil. Something worse. Something patient. Crowley poured another drink, lifted it slowly, and whispered, almost too softly, to hear, "I'm the last thing you'll ever see." The saloon doors banged violently in the wind. A glass fell, shattering against the floorboards. Mary Whitlock, the widow, gasped and crossed herself. The preacher, Reverend Silas Gray, finally stood, his voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "This is a house of sin," Silas declared, pointing at Crowley. "You mock God, you desecrate his name, and you poison these people with—" Before he could finish, Crowley slammed his hand on the bar so hard the wood cracked beneath his palm. Every lamp guttered at once, shadows leaping wildly across the walls. "You leave him out of this," Crowley snarled, his grin gone, his voice low and venomous. "Ain't no God in Redwood Creek, not anymore." Reverend Silas faltered, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. Crowley leaned forward on the bar, his pale gray eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight. "This is my house," he said slowly, every word heavy as stone. "And tonight, gentlemen, you'll drink what I give you, or you'll bleed where you sit." The silence that followed was suffocating. The 12 strangers exchanged glances, but nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Outside, thunder roared like cannon fire, and the storm clawed harder at the saloon walls. Then, from somewhere deep beneath their feet, they heard it again. A faint, scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across stone. Jonas stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floorboards. "What's under us?" he demanded, his hand on his revolver. Crowley smiled again, slow and easy. "Cellar," he said simply. "What's in it?" Crowley's grin widened, revealing teeth just a shade too sharp. "History." Jonas stared at him for a long moment, his instincts screaming, every nerve alive with warning. Something was terribly, terribly wrong here. He knew he should leave, saddle up his horse, and never look back. But as lightning split the night sky, Jonas glanced around at the 11 other souls trapped inside with him. They weren't leaving. Not yet. Not ever if Crowley had his way. And deep below Crowley's rest, in the damp black belly of the earth, something was already waiting for them. The storm raged harder outside, hammering the warped shutters of Crowley's rest. Wind screamed through the gaps in the walls, rattling every glass on the bar. The saloon lamps flickered, threatening to die with each gust, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. The smell of wet wood, spilled whiskey and sweat clung to the air like a suffocating blanket. 12 people sat inside, bound together by chance, greed, desperation, and fate. None of them knew it yet, but each had stepped into the jaws of something ancient and merciless. Jonas Hale leaned against the back wall, eyes scanning every corner, every face. He had the hunter's patience, but even he could feel it now, a wrongness settling over the saloon like a damp shroud. Something beneath the floor creaked, faint but deliberate. Nobody mentioned it. Not yet. At a table near the bar sat Clara and Samuel Boyd, the newlyweds. Clara clutched her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white, her wide blue eyes darting nervously around the room. Samuel tried to act calm, sipping at a glass he barely touched, but Jonas noticed the tremor in his hand. They were young, too young for this place. Fresh off the stagecoach from Missouri, chasing promises of land and fortune, they'd stepped into Crowley's Rest, thinking it a safe stop for the night. Now, they looked like prey who'd wandered into a wolf's den. Across from them sat Thomas Pike, the slick-tongued snake oil salesman. His bright green vest clashed against the muted tones of the dusty saloon, and his thin mustache curled at the ends like a villain from a dime novel. He twirled a brass coin between his fingers, talking endlessly, his voice rising above the low murmurs. "Gentlefolk, I'll tell ya," Pike declared, grinning wide. "There ain't a sickness on God's earth I can't cure. Got me a tonic straight from New Orleans, good for the blood, the bones, even the He leaned closer and winked at Abigail Monroe, the showgirl seated nearby. "More personal ailments." Abigail rolled her eyes and lit another cigarette, exhaling smoke with practiced boredom. Dressed in a red corset and velvet shawl, she carried herself like a woman who'd seen too much to be impressed by salesmen or preachers alike. Her rouged lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "You should bottle your own breath, Pike," she said coolly. "Might cure people of ever talking again." A ripple of laughter passed through the room, easing the tension for just a moment. Even Jonas smirked faintly, though his hand never strayed far from the revolver at his hip. In the corner, seated with his back perfectly straight, was Reverend Silas Gray. His black coat was damp from the rain, his Bible resting carefully on the table beside him. He'd said little since his outburst earlier, but his eyes never left Crowley. He mouthed silent prayers now, fingers brushing the small silver cross at his neck, whispering the same scripture over and over. Jonas caught fragments of it when the wind died. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Two men leaned lazily against the far wall. Caleb and Josiah Black, twins notorious up and down the frontier for starting trouble wherever whiskey was served. Thick-necked, broad-shouldered, and armed with matching Bowie knives, the brothers were dangerous, but their danger came from stupidity more than cunning. They eyed Jonas with open hostility, already half-drunk and itching for a fight. "Bounty hunter," Caleb muttered, spitting tobacco into a cracked spittoon. "Ain't welcome round here," Josiah grinned wickedly. "Less you're buyin'." The next round. Jonas ignored them, which seemed to irritate them even more. Near the staircase sat Mary Whitlock, a pale widow dressed in black mourning clothes despite the heat. Her delicate hands clutched a silver locket she never opened, rubbing it like a charm. Her gaze rarely lifted from the table, though every so often her sharp grey eyes flicked toward Crowley with something between fear and recognition. Jonas noticed it, filed it away. The last of the guests, seated closest to the saloon doors, was Harlan Briggs, a broad man with a thick beard and sun-worn skin. He claimed to be a rancher headed west, but Jonas knew the type. Briggs had the weight of violence in his shoulders, the kind you carried when you'd spent too many nights robbing stagecoaches and too many mornings burying bodies you'd rather forget. And then there was Deputy Eli Garner, the so-called lawman of Redwood Creek. He nursed a single glass of whiskey, his face pale and slick with sweat. Jonas had seen fear before, but this was something different. Resignation. The look of a man who'd accepted the noose was already around his neck. No one spoke much after that. The storm filled the silence. The fiddler had stopped playing entirely, his bow resting uselessly on his lap. Crowley busied himself behind the bar, rearranging his strange vials, muttering something too low to hear. Jonas strained to catch the words, but only managed fragments. Bound in blood, 12 souls. The circle completed. The number made him freeze. 12. Clara Boyd finally broke the silence. "Mr. Crowley," she said softly, trying to sound polite. "We were told there were rooms upstairs. Could we—" Crowley turned slowly, his smile sharp but hollow. "Rooms are for folks staying the night," he said, voice low. "Best you keep close to the fire. Storm like this, something out there's hungry." Samuel frowned. "Hungry?" Crowley's grin widened unnaturally, his gray eyes glinting. "In the lamplight. Best not to ask." The year was 1878, a time when Texas bled dust, whiskey, and death. In a forgotten corner of the wild frontier where the law traveled slower than rumors, there stood a saloon that no map dared mark. Locals called it Crowley's Rest. And on a storm-torn summer night, 12 strangers stepped inside, none of them knowing they would never step out again. The sun was sinking behind a blood-orange horizon when a lone rider appeared on the crooked trail leading into Redwood Creek. His horse limped beneath him, hooves sinking into the cracked earth. The air was heavy, too still, too quiet. The kind of silence that made a man grip his revolver tighter. The rider's name was Jonas Hale, a bounty hunter carrying more scars than bullets. He wasn't here for rest. He was hunting a man, a deserter named Ezekiel Crowley. But as Jonas crested the ridge overlooking the town, a cold shiver crept up his spine. Redwood Creek wasn't much of a town. Just a crooked line of weather-beaten shacks, a leaning church steeple, and one building taller than the rest. A 2-story saloon with warped shutters and a sign that swayed in the wind. Crowley's Rest. Jonas spit dust from his teeth and muttered, under his breath, "Figures." Redwood Creek had a reputation. Travelers spoke of it in hushed tones, a place where folk went missing, where the sheriff was buried 6 feet under, and where the saloon owner, Crowley, was said to serve more than just whiskey. Inside the general store, an old woman with cloudy eyes spotted Jonas tying up his horse. She shuffled forward, gripping his arm with knobby fingers. Old woman, whispering, "Don't go in there, son. Not tonight." Jonas, frowning, "I didn't ride 50 miles for a sermon." Old woman, "You don't understand. Folks walk into that place and they don't walk back out." Her hand trembled. Jonas pulled free and adjusted his coat. "Ma'am, I got business with the owner." The old woman hesitated, lowering her voice until it was barely a breath. Old woman, "Then God help you, 'cause Crowley won't." Jonas left her standing in the dust, clutching a silver cross like it could stop the devil himself. As night fell, oil lamps flickered inside the saloon, casting long shadows across its warped floorboards. Laughter, the clink of glasses, and the twang of a fiddle leaked through the swinging doors. But beneath the noise was something else. Something wrong. A tension in the air. A low hum, like the building itself was holding its breath. Jonas pushed through the doors, stepping into a haze of whiskey fumes and cigar smoke. Dozens of faces turned to look at him. Cowboys, drifters, gamblers, and for a brief moment, silence swallowed the room. Then the fiddler struck his strings again, and the saloon came back to life. Behind the bar stood Ezekiel Zeke Crowley. Tall, broad-shouldered, a crooked smile carved into his face like a scar. His black waistcoat was stained with something that wasn't whiskey, and his piercing grey eyes fixed on Jonas with unsettling precision. Crowley, grinning. "Welcome, stranger. Crowley's Rest don't get many bounty hunters." Jonas, flatly. "Ain't here for the drinks." Crowley. "Shame. Best whiskey west of the Pecos. Brewed it myself." Crowley slid a glass across the bar, but Jonas didn't touch it. The silence between them was sharp enough to cut. It was around this time the other guests began to gather. Among them were the 12 whose names would later be carved into dusty headstones, if they were buried at all. Reverend Silas Gray, a preacher running from his own sins. Clara and Samuel Boyd, a newlywed couple seeking fortune in the West. Harlan Briggs, a former outlaw now pretending to be a rancher. Abigail Monroe, a traveling showgirl with secrets of her own. Thomas Pike, a snake oil salesman, smooth talker and chronic liar. Deputy Eli Garner, the closest thing Redwood Creek had to law. Caleb and Josiah Black, twin brothers, known for starting fights they couldn't finish. Mary Whitlock, a widow on the run, clutching a locket she never opened. Jonas Hale, the bounty hunter, our reluctant witness to hell. And finally Zeke Crowley, the man who held their fates in his blood-stained hands. Fate had dragged these 12 into Crowley's Rest. None of them knew it yet, but before sunrise, none would leave alive. As Jonas settled into a corner table, his sharp eyes scanned the room. Something gnawed at him. Above the bar, etched into the wood, were symbols he didn't recognize. Circles crossed with jagged lines, smeared with what looked suspiciously like dried blood. The air grew heavier with each passing minute. The fiddle player slowed his tune, his bow scraping unevenly across the strings. A woman whispered a prayer under her breath. And Crowley never stopped smiling. Jonas, low voice to Eli, the deputy. "What's with the markings?" Deputy Eli, avoiding his gaze. "Don't ask, don't look, don't drink the whiskey." Jonas, noted. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. The saloon's lanterns flickered, shadows stretching and bending unnaturally across the walls. Crowley raised his glass. Crowley, to the room. "To fate, gentlemen, and the roads that bring us together." They drank. Jonas didn't, and that's when he noticed something else. The whiskey was redder than it should have been, thicker, almost syrupy. His gut twisted. Somewhere upstairs a door slammed, though no one had gone up. The fiddler stopped playing. For one long, choking moment, the only sound was the heartbeat pounding in Jonas's ears. Then Crowley leaned in close, his voice a rasped whisper meant only for Jonas. "Crowley, best enjoy the night, bounty hunter. Ain't many left." Jonas froze, not because of the words, but because Crowley's breath reeked of copper. And then the saloon doors burst open. A drenched stranger staggered inside, pale as moonlight, gasping for air. Blood soaked his shirt, dripping onto the warped floorboards. He looked around the room with wild, terrified eyes. "Stranger," hoarse whisper, "don't drink, the whiskey. And before anyone could speak, he collapsed, stone dead. The room went silent. Every glass sat untouched. And somewhere, deep beneath the saloon, something moved. That night, the storm wouldn't be the only thing that tore through Redwood Creek. By sunrise, 12 souls would leave this world, and Crowley's Rest would enter legend. The storm outside deepened, rattling the warped shutters of Crowley's Rest as the dead stranger's body was dragged into a corner. The saloon fell into an uneasy silence. Every face was pale, every glass untouched. Jonas Hale kept his back against the wall, his revolver resting on his thigh, watching Ezekiel Crowley with cold suspicion. Crowley stood behind the bar, wiping his hands with a rag already stained deep red. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't curious. He wasn't even pretending to care. He just smiled, that crooked, knowing smile, like a man who'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Storms bring in more than rain tonight," Crowley said softly, his voice calm enough to unsettle the room. "Some nights, gentlemen, the devil comes collectin'." A nervous laugh escaped Thomas Pike, the snake oil salesman, but it died as quickly as it came. Nobody else spoke. The fiddler lowered his bow and stepped away, muttering a prayer under his breath. The only sound was the wind tearing at the walls, and somewhere beneath them a faint scraping. Jonas leaned toward Deputy Eli Garner, keeping his voice low. "You gonna tell me what's going on here, or am I gonna find out the hard way?" Eli's jaw tightened. His hand hovered over his holster, but his eyes never met Jonas's. "You don't want to know," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Nobody wants to know. We just live with it." Jonas frowned. "Live with what?" Before Eli could answer, Crowley slammed a bottle down on the bar, shattering it into sharp pieces. Everyone flinched, hands twitching toward weapons, but Crowley just laughed, a deep, cold sound that rolled like distant thunder. "You boys come into my house," Crowley drawled. "Drink my whiskey, play my tables. But you don't know whose table you're really sitting at." He poured himself a glass from a different bottle, one sealed with black wax, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The liquid inside wasn't amber like whiskey. It was darker, thicker, almost red. Jonas's stomach churned. He recognized the smell. It wasn't liquor. Years later, survivors would whisper about that moment, the way Crowley drank from that bottle like it was sacrament, the way his lips stained dark and his gray eyes burned brighter in the lamplight. But on that night, they didn't yet know who Ezekiel Crowley truly was, or what he had done to build his empire of death. Crowley wasn't born in Texas. He came from the ashes of the Deep South, from a small Georgia plantation burned to the ground during the last days of the Civil War. They said his family was cursed, long before he was born, that his grandfather had sold something precious for power and wealth. Crowley never confirmed it. He didn't have to. There was something in his bloodline that didn't belong to God. After the war, Zeke wandered from town to town, surviving on cards, lies, and the edge of a knife. But somewhere along the road, something changed him. The story went that in 1871, he crossed paths with a traveling medicine man, an outcast from New Orleans named Dr. Thaddeus Moreau. Some called him a healer, others called him a witch. People whispered that Moreau knew ways to bind a man's soul and cheat the grave. Abigail scoffed. "What, you afraid of a little thunder?" Eli looked at her then, his pale face ashen. "That ain't thunder," he said. Almost on cue, a low, guttural sound rumbled from above, faint like someone dragging heavy chains across the floorboards. Jonas's hand went to his gun immediately, but Crowley didn't move, didn't even flinch. Clara gasped, clutching Samuel's arm tighter. Mary Whitlock whispered a single word, too quiet for anyone but Jonas to hear. Again. Jonas turned sharply to her. "Again?" he asked. voice low. But Mary just shook her head and stared at her locket, lips trembling. The storm outside roared louder, the windows rattling in their frames. Crowley finally stepped out from behind the bar, his boots creaking against the warped wood. He walked slowly, deliberately, to the center of the room, his presence commanding silence without a word. "Some of you," he said, voice steady, "think you're passing through. Just stopping for a drink, but there ain't no passing through Redwood Creek." Jonas straightened. "Meaning what?" Crowley's eyes locked on his and the smile returned, cold, empty, unblinking. "Meaning," he said softly, "you were meant to be here." A gust of wind slammed against the saloon doors, rattling them violently, and for the briefest heartbeat, every lantern guttered and died. Darkness swallowed the room whole. In that black silence, someone screamed. The scream cut through the darkness, like a blade. For a split second nobody moved, every breath in the saloon froze, suspended between thunderclaps. Then, as if mocking them, the lamps sputtered back to life one by one, spilling sickly yellow light across terrified faces. Clara Boyd clung to her husband, shaking violently. Thomas Pike stumbled backward, knocking over his chair, his cocky grin gone. Caleb and Josiah Black had their knives out now, eyes darting around the room like trapped wolves. Jonas Hale stood motionless, his revolver drawn, scanning every shadow. Who screamed? Abigail Monroe's voice cracked, sharper than she intended. Who the hell screamed? No one answered. The sound had come from upstairs, but the hallway above was silent now. Too silent. Deputy Eli Garner stood frozen, sweat rolling down his temple. "It starts," he whispered, barely audible over the pounding rain. Jonas turned sharply toward him. "What starts?" Eli didn't respond. He just sank into his chair and downed the rest of his whiskey, his hand shaking so badly half of it spilled down his shirt. Crowley hadn't moved since the lights came back. He stood dead center in the saloon, hands folded loosely in front of him, calm as a preacher on Sunday morning. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate and steady. Too steady. "Storm's got a mean way of bringing things up from the dark," he said. "Best stay close to the fire." Jonas's jaw tightened. "What's upstairs?" Crowley's pale gray eyes drifted to him, unblinking. "Rooms I don't rent." Samuel Boyd swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "If there's someone up there, maybe hurt, we should check." Crowley cut him off sharply, his smile widening like a blade unsheathing. "Ain't nobody up there, boy. Nothing that walks on two legs anyway." A nervous murmur spread among the 12. But before anyone could speak, the saloon doors banged violently against the frame. The wind outside howled like a dying animal, forcing its way through the cracks in the wood. It carried with it a deep, low sound. Not quite thunder, not quite human. Jonas's instincts screamed. Every muscle in his body was taut, ready to move, ready to fight. But fight what? Then Thomas Pike, desperate to break the tension, forced a laugh. "Hell, maybe it's just a raccoon," he said, voice trembling, "or a loose shutter. Storms like this." The fiddler, silent until now, spoke without lifting his head. His voice was low, hollow, and strangely detached. "It ain't the storm." Every eye turned to him. The fiddler's hands trembled where they rested on the bow, his knuckles white. He looked up slowly, his face pale as bone. "I've been playing here 8 years," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "And every time it rains like this, people disappear." Clara gasped softly. Jonas stepped forward, lowering his revolver but keeping his grip tight. "Disappear how?" The fiddler shook his head. "Doors stay locked, windows barred. But come morning, chairs are empty and folks are just gone." Silence swallowed the room again. Even the twins, usually quick with a joke or a fight, said nothing now. Only Crowley smiled. Finally, Jonas broke the silence. "All right, enough games." He pointed his revolver toward Crowley. "You're gonna tell me what's happening here, or I swear to God." Crowley laughed, not loud, not mocking, but soft and cold, like a man who knew secrets no bullet could kill. "Ain't got enough bullets, bounty hunter," he said calmly. "Not for what's coming." And with that, he turned back behind the bar and pulled out a bottle sealed with dark wax. Its glass was old and blackened, etched with faint circular markings. "Drink," Crowley said simply, pouring 12 small glasses and lining them carefully along the counter. Nobody moved. Jonas stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "What's in it?" Crowley's smile widened, his teeth catching the lantern light. "Whiskey," he said softly. "Best damn whiskey you'll ever taste." Jonas didn't believe him, neither did anyone else. But Crowley waited patiently, his pale gray eyes sweeping across each of them, one by one, like a predator choosing who to strike first. Abigail snorted, trying to mask her unease. "If that's whiskey, I'm the Virgin Mary." Crowley chuckled low. "Then bless yourself, darling, and drink deep." Finally, Caleb Black swaggered forward, grabbing one of the glasses defiantly. "Hell, I'll drink it," he said, shooting Jonas a mocking glance. "Ain't scared of some backwater ghost story." He tipped the glass back, swallowing the thick, dark liquid in one gulp. A silence followed, every eye fixed on him. Caleb grinned, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "See?" he said, smirking. "Just He stopped. His grin faltered, his breath hitched, his hand went to his throat. "Caleb?" Josiah stepped forward, concern replacing his usual sneer. Caleb dropped the glass. It shattered against the floor, spraying the dark liquid across the boards like spilled blood. He gasped violently, clawing at his neck, his face twisting in pain. Jonas was already moving, grabbing Caleb by the shoulders, but the man convulsed violently, collapsing onto the floor. Blood dribbled from his mouth, his veins bulging dark beneath his skin. Josiah screamed his brother's name, dropping to his knees beside him, shaking him violently. "Caleb, goddammit, breathe!" But Caleb wasn't breathing. He went still. Dead. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind outside, shrieking through the cracks like laughter. Samuel pulled Clara close, shielding her face. Abigail stood frozen, her cigarette trembling between her fingers. Thomas Pike backed away, muttering curses under his breath. Crowley leaned against the bar, watching the scene with unnerving calm. "One," he whispered softly. Jonas turned sharply. "What?" Crowley looked at him, pale gray eyes glinting. "One," he repeated. 11 to go. For a moment, nobody breathed. Josiah screamed, drawing his Bowie knife and charging the bar. "You son of a bitch!" Crowley didn't move. Josiah lunged, but before his blade could reach Crowley, the lamps flickered violently and went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. And in that darkness, something moved, a wet, dragging sound. A low, guttural growl. The sound of something breathing where it shouldn't. Jonas fired blindly, the flash of his revolver briefly illuminating the saloon. And in that single heartbeat of light, he saw something hunched in the corner, tall and wrong. Its limbs, too long, its mouth open too wide, its eyes glowing faintly red. Then the light was gone. Someone screamed, and the sound came from the cellar. The saloon was dead silent, save for the storm outside hammering the wooden walls like 1,000 angry fists. Caleb's body lay sprawled across the floor, his pale face frozen in a grimace of pain, his lifeless eyes wide and glassy. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the warped floorboards. Josiah knelt over his brother, rocking him back and forth, his breath coming in ragged, animalistic gasps. "You killed him," Josiah whispered, his voice hoarse with rage. His head snapped toward Crowley, teeth bared like a cornered wolf. "You bastard, you poisoned him!" Crowley leaned lazily against the bar, swirling a glass of that same black whiskey between his fingers. His face was calm, unnervingly so. "Didn't kill your brother, boy," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "Something else did." Josiah lunged, knife flashing in the dim lantern light, but Jonas intercepted him, grabbing his arm and forcing the blade downward. "Stop!" Jonas barked, shoving him back. "Think, damn it! You gut Crowley, we still don't know what's happening here." Josiah's chest heaved, his face streaked with tears and sweat. "What's happening is my brother's dead." Jonas kept his revolver drawn, scanning the shadows. "I know," he said, his voice softer now. "But we don't know what killed him yet." A sudden sound cut through the room, faint, distant, but unmistakable. 3 slow knocks. They came from beneath them, the cellar. Everyone froze. Clara whimpered, clutching Samuel's arm. Abigail dropped her cigarette, grinding it under her boot, with a shaky hand. Deputy Eli Garner's lips moved silently, whispering a prayer. Jonas cocked his revolver, his knuckles white. "Who the hell's down there?" Crowley finally smiled. Not his usual sly grin, but something colder, emptier. "Ain't nobody down there," he said quietly, his voice almost reverent. "Ain't nobody living anyway." Another 3 knocks, louder this time. The fiddler set his instrument down, his trembling hands clumsy. "I told y'all," he whispered, voice cracking. "Every time it rains like this, they come back." Abigail's sharp voice cut through the tension. "Who the hell are they?" The fiddler turned slowly toward her, his face pale as ash. "The ones that ain't supposed to leave." Before anyone could speak, Josiah stood abruptly, grabbing Caleb's Bowie knife from his dead hand. "I'm not sitting here waiting to die," he snarled. "If something's down there, I'm killing it." Jonas grabbed his arm again, but Josiah wrenched free, wild-eyed and desperate. "Stay here," Jonas ordered the others, then followed Josiah as he stalked toward the cellar door in the far corner. The others shuffled closer together instinctively, forming a loose circle around the flickering lantern on the table. Josiah yanked the cellar door open. A wave of cold, damp air rushed up, carrying with it a stench so foul it burned the back of Jonas's throat, rot, mildew, and something metallic. Jonas moved cautiously down the creaking steps behind Josiah, revolver raised. The cellar below was shrouded in darkness, the air thick and oppressive. "Hold up," Jonas whispered, lowering his lantern slowly into the black void below. Something shifted in the shadows. "Who's there?" Jonas demanded, his voice steady, but low. Silence. Then, without warning, Josiah screamed, not a shout of surprise, but a guttural, blood-curdling howl of agony. Jonas spun toward him just in time to see Josiah's body yanked violently backward into the darkness. "Josiah!" Jonas roared, lunging forward. The lantern clattered to the floor, shattering, spilling burning oil across the wooden planks. In the split-second light, Jonas caught a glimpse of something. Pale, slick flesh, elongated limbs bent at unnatural angles, and a maw full of jagged teeth. Then it was gone, vanishing deeper into the cellar with Josiah's screams echoing behind. Jonas stumbled back up the stairs, slamming the cellar door shut and throwing the iron latch down. He pressed his back to the wall, panting hard. "Josiah's gone," he said, his voice flat, dead. Clara burst into tears. Samuel pulled her close, whispering futile reassurances. Abigail cursed under her breath, pacing frantically. Crowley, though, didn't move. He stood behind the bar, watching Jonas silently, his pale gray eyes glittering in the low light. Jonas turned on him, fury boiling in his chest. "What the hell is that thing?" Crowley tilted his head, expression unreadable. "Ain't a thing," he said softly. "Not anymore." Abigail stormed toward him, her hands balled into fists. "Enough with your riddles, old man. Tell us what's happening." Crowley finally set his glass down, leaning forward on the bar, his voice low and deliberate. "Long time ago," he began, "Redwood Creek was Apache land. There was a massacre, right where this saloon stands now. Women, children, warriors, slaughtered, buried beneath these floors. They say their blood cursed this ground, called something up from deeper than hell itself." Abigail scoffed bitterly, but her voice wavered. "You expect us to believe ghost stories while something just ate Josiah?" Crowley's gaze was cold, steady. "Believe what you want, darling. Don't change what's coming." Another sound from the cellar. This time a low, rumbling growl, wet and guttural. The fiddler whispered shakily, "It ain't human." Jonas turned to the group. "Nobody opens that door again," he ordered. "We bar every window, we stay together, and we wait for daylight." But the storm outside only grew louder, the wind screaming like the dead themselves. The lamps flickered violently, shadows jerking across the walls like living things. Then came the scratching. It started faint, nails dragging lightly across wood, then louder, then faster, from every wall, from beneath the floor. Clara screamed, covering her ears. Samuel held her tightly, backing them both against the wall. Abigail cursed again, pulling her pistol from her skirt. Jonas spun toward Crowley, expecting fear, but the man was smiling again, slow and deliberate. "You hear that?" Crowley whispered. "They're waking up." And just as he said it, the lanterns all went out at once. Darkness swallowed the saloon. Someone screamed, and upstairs something began walking, heavy, slow, deliberate, one step at a time. The darkness was absolute, not the soft, quiet kind of darkness that comes when a candle burns low, but a suffocating blackness that felt alive, heavy, oppressive, and watching. Somewhere in the pitch, someone was breathing too fast, shallow and panicked. "Light the damn lamps!" Abigail hissed, fumbling against the bar. Her trembling hands found a match, and with a sharp strike, the brief spark illuminated her pale, sweat-slicked face. She cupped the tiny flame with her palm, shielding it from the draft, and lit the nearest oil lamp. One by one, the survivors followed suit, reawakening the dim amber glow across the saloon. But the light only made things worse. The blood. It wasn't just beneath Caleb's body anymore. It had spread. Thin, snaking trails of it stretched across the warped floorboards, weaving through tables and chairs like veins in old skin. The red shimmered faintly in the flickering lamplight, and none of them could tell where it began or where it ended. Samuel's voice cracked when he finally spoke. That ain't Caleb's blood, is it?" Jonas crouched low, inspecting one of the trails. He touched a finger to it, rubbed it between his fingertips, then stared at the wet smear on his skin. "No," he muttered darkly. "This is fresh." Abigail's breath hitched. "From what?" The scratching started again, louder this time. It came from inside the walls. Clara's scream pierced the air, and Samuel grabbed her, pulling her tight against his chest. Jonas raised his revolver, pointing it toward the nearest wall, where the sound was deepest, sharp, frantic claws tearing at the wood, like something trying to dig its way out. Crowley didn't move. He stood behind the bar, leaning slightly, on his elbows, his expression blank, his pale gray eyes reflecting the lamplight like twin shards of glass. Jonas finally snapped, his voice thunderous. "What the hell is in these walls, Crowley?" For the first time since the night began, Crowley actually looked nervous. He glanced toward the ceiling, then to the cellar door, his jaw tightening. "There's places under this saloon," he said quietly, choosing his words with care. "Old tunnels, Apache burial tunnels. This whole damn town sitting on bones. Abigail rounded on him, fury blazing in her eyes. And you didn't think to mention that before? Crowley's lips twitched into something between a smile and a grimace. Wouldn't have mattered. Once you stepped inside, it was too late. Loud thud upstairs made everyone freeze. Jonas turned toward the staircase, his revolver trembling slightly in his hand. Another thud. Then another. Slow, steady, deliberate footsteps creaking across the second floor. Everyone stay together, Jonas whispered, motioning them into a tight circle around the lanterns. Whatever's up there, it already knows we're down here. The fiddler shook his head violently, muttering under his breath. This is wrong. This is all wrong. It don't like the light. We need to snuff the lamps. No, Jonas cut him off sharply. We're not sitting here in the dark. But as if to mock him, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then came the sound. Not a step this time, but a deep, rattling inhale. Like something impossibly large was breathing just above them. It was wet, broken, like lungs filled with water. Clara whimpered into Samuel's chest, her shoulders shaking violently. Then, without warning, the upstairs hallway erupted with a piercing scream, high-pitched, unearthly, inhuman. It was followed by an ear-splitting crash, as though furniture had been flung against the walls. Jonas motioned to Abigail and Eli. With me, we're checking upstairs. The rest of you, I stay put, and for God's sake, don't open that cellar door. But Crowley stepped forward, blocking Jonas's path. You go up there. You die, he said simply, his voice low, steady. Jonas shoved past him, snarling. Better than waiting for whatever's down here to pick us off one by one. They crept up the narrow staircase, lanterns raised, weapons drawn. The steps groaned beneath their weight, and with every creak, Jonas swore he could hear whispering. Faint, fragmented voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before them. Dark, long, lined with crooked doors. Blood smeared the faded wallpaper, handprints dragged along the walls like someone had been clawing their way forward. Abigail covered her mouth, her pistol shaking in her grip. What the hell happened up here? Eli leaned close to one of the doors, pressing his ear against the wood. He turned back, his face ashen. Something's in this room. Jonas nodded, tightening his grip on his revolver. He counted silently under his breath. 1, 2, 3, and kicked the door open. The room was empty, or at least it should have been. The window was wide open, rain lashing against the sill, the curtains whipping violently in the wind. The bed was overturned, the sheets shredded. Something had gouged deep claw marks into the wooden floorboards. Then Abigail noticed something in the far corner. Jonas, she whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. In the corner, facing the wall, knelt a man, or what was left of one. His back was arched unnaturally, his spine jutting out beneath torn, blood-soaked clothing. His long, tangled hair clung wetly to his face. He didn't move. Sir, Jonas called, stepping forward cautiously. The man's head snapped around violently, twisting too far, neck cracking like dry wood. His face was gaunt, stretched, and his eyes, milky, pupil-less, locked onto Jonas. Then he screamed. It wasn't human. The sound was a shriek of pure agony, rage, and hunger rolled into one. Before Jonas could fire, the man, the thing, lunged. Jonas shot him point blank in the chest. The creature barely staggered. Abigail screamed, firing 2 shots into its skull. This time it collapsed, twitching violently before finally going still. They stood there, panting, the stench of gunpowder mixing with blood and rain-soaked wood. Eli leaned over the body, poking it cautiously with his rifle barrel. What the hell was that? Jonas shook his head slowly, his voice low and grim. I don't think it was ever human to begin with. Downstairs, a sudden crash echoed, followed by Clara's scream. They bolted back to the staircase, Abigail leading the way. As they reached the bottom, they froze. The saloon's double doors were wide open. The storm roared through the entryway, soaking the floor, extinguishing half the lamps. Samuel and Clara were pressed against the far wall, pale and trembling. "The cellar door," Samuel stammered, pointing with a shaking hand. It opened on its own." Crowley stood in front of it now, revolver in hand, his face expressionless. Behind him, the cellar yawned open like a black mouth. "They're awake," Crowley said quietly, "and now they're hungry." The cellar yawned open like a wound in the earth, blacker than the storm outside, swallowing the lamplight whole. A smell drifted upward, foul and damp, like rotting leather left too long in stagnant water. Clara gagged and pressed her face into Samuel's chest, but Samuel couldn't take his eyes off it. It wasn't just a hole in the floor anymore. It felt alive. Crowley stood with his revolver steady, the firelight glinting in his pale eyes. He wasn't panicked, wasn't afraid. His voice was calm, almost reverent. "Stay back. They'll come on their own time." Jonas shoved him hard against the wall, fury snapping in his eyes. "Who the hell are they, Crowley?" Crowley's smile was faint, unsettling, as though he were recalling an old prayer. "The ones who were promised a feast." Abigail's voice trembled, sharp and desperate. "Promised? By who?" Crowley looked past them, down into the cellar. "By me." The floorboards shook, a low rumble vibrating through the saloon. Something massive shifted in the dark beneath them. Jonas's revolver was up instantly, trained on the void. The fiddler shaking so violently his bow clattered to the ground, muttered through dry lips. "Oh Lord, oh sweet Lord." Then it came. A hand. Or at least, what had once been a hand. It rose from the cellar slowly. Fingers impossibly long, the skin stretched thin over bone, wet and glistening like it had been soaking in brine. The nails were black, cracked, curled into sharp points. It gripped the cellar edge, splintering the wood beneath its strength. Clara shrieked, her cry raw, piercing. Samuel tried to pull her back, but she clawed at him, refusing to look away. As more of it climbed upward, a shoulder, a torso hunched and twisted, bones jutting from its skin like broken spears. Its head came last, bald, pale, its face eyeless, its mouth too wide, teeth jagged and glistening with black spit. Abigail fired first. The shot tore through its chest, splattering chunks of flesh across the floorboards. The creature staggered, but did not fall. It only opened its mouth wider, releasing a sound that was not a scream, not a roar, but something deeper, guttural, like the earth itself mourning. It lunged. The fiddler didn't even move. He was frozen in place when the thing's clawed hand sliced clean through his chest. His violin clattered to the floor as his body folded in two, blood spraying across the tables and lamps. The monster tossed him aside like a broken doll, his lifeless body smashing through glass. Clara's screams grew wilder. Samuel tried to drag her toward the back, but her feet tangled, her body collapsing to the floor. She crawled desperately, sobbing, but the creature was faster. It gripped her ankle and yanked. Her nails scraped across the wood, leaving trails of blood as she fought, but in a single motion it tore her upward into the air. "No!" Samuel roared, leaping at it, driving his knife into its arm. The beast shrieked, jerking violently, and Clara was flung against the wall. She hit hard, slumping into a heap, her eyes wide and glassy, chest still but for a faint shudder. Samuel ripped the blade free, stabbing again and again into its torso. But the creature didn't bleed like a man. Black ichor sprayed in thick spurts, sizzling where it landed on wood. The smell of burned flesh filled the saloon as the floor hissed and smoked. Eli raised his rifle and fired. The shot blew half the monster's skull away. This time it collapsed, shaking the floor as it hit. For a moment, silence. Jonas's chest heaved. Abigail's hands trembled so hard her pistol almost slipped from her grip. But then the cellar roared. Dozens of voices, screams, growls, whispers, rose at once, echoing up the tunnel. The darkness shifted and more shapes began to climb. "Sweet Jesus," Eli muttered, backing toward the bar. Jonas barked, "Barricade it now." They flipped tables, shoved barrels, dragged shelves across the cellar door, wood scraping against wood as panic lent them strength. Crowley, still pressed against the wall, only watched. His expression was almost tender, like a father watching his children at play. Abigail turned on him, her fury breaking into sobs. "You knew this would happen. You brought us here to die." Crowley finally spoke, his voice low, steady. "Not to die, to feed." Abigail raised her pistol, aiming at his head. Her finger trembled on the trigger, but before she could fire, a hand burst up through the floorboards beside her, claws raking her leg. She screamed, dropping the gun, blood pouring from her calf. Jonas grabbed her, yanking her away just as another hand tore through the wood near Samuel. "They're in the walls!" Samuel roared, stabbing wildly at the floor. The saloon was no longer a building. It was a cage. The walls shook as things pressed against them from the outside, splintering the boards. Clawed fingers reached through every gap. The sound of chewing filled the air, wet, hungry, tearing. The lamps flickered violently. One toppled in the chaos, crashing to the floor. Flames erupted instantly, licking across whiskey-soaked planks. Jonas shouted above the roar, his voice hoarse with desperation. "We hold 'em off or we burn with the place." Eli fired round after round, the gunshots deafening, but for every twisted form that fell, two more clawed upward. Samuel, bloodied and wild-eyed, hacked at hands with his knife, his face a mask of grief and rage as he shielded Clara's limp body. Abigail clung to Jonas, her wound slowing her, tears streaming down her face. And through it all, Crowley stood still, the flames painting his face in flickering orange, his eyes reflecting. "The chaos, they will not stop," he murmured. "Not until the 12 have bled. Only then will the hunger sleep." Jonas turned on him, bellowing, "What in God's name are you talking about?" Crowley smiled faintly. "You were never guests. You were offerings." The fire spread quickly. Now, the smoke choking, the screams echoing. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, hell had already opened its mouth. Smoke clawed at their lungs as Jonas shoved open the door to the upper level, coughing so hard his ribs ached. Flames licked the staircase behind them, climbing hungrily, snapping and spitting sparks into the air. "Go, go, keep moving," he bellowed, dragging Abigail up by her arm, her blood smearing across the wooden steps. Samuel stumbled after them, half carrying Clara's limp body, despite Elias's shouts. "Leave her, Sam! She's gone! We gotta run!" Samuel's face twisted into something between rage and despair. "You shut your damn mouth," he snarled, hauling Clara tighter against him. "She's breathing. She's still breathing." Abigail limped behind them, pale and slick with sweat, her pistol clutched in trembling hands. Behind her, the sounds from below were getting louder, wet, tearing, crunching bones, screams cut short in gurgles. The monsters were climbing. Elias slammed the upper hallway door shut as they spilled onto the second floor, jamming a chair beneath the handle. "Won't hold 'em long," he wheezed. The upstairs hall stretched into darkness, lined with doors to rented rooms. The lamplight barely reached the far end. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Abigail staggered against the wall, panting. We can hide in one of the rooms." Jonas turned sharply, eyes blazing through the smoke. "Hide? They'll rip through these walls like paper." Samuel knelt with Clara in the hallway, pressing his ear to her lips, praying for breath. When none came, he started shaking her, whispering her name again and again. Elias approached slowly, lowering his rifle. "Sam," "Don't you say it," Samuel snapped, wild-eyed, his voice cracking. "She ain't dead." Jonas crouched, grabbing Samuel by the shoulders. "Look at me, damn it. If we don't move now, we're all dead." Samuel's breathing grew ragged. Finally, he lowered Clara gently onto the wooden floor, his hand trembling as it brushed a lock of her hair from her face. He didn't look at her again. Abigail limped closer, placing a blood-streaked hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Sam," she whispered. The silence was brief. A sound crept into the hallway, slow, deliberate, wet. Drip, drip, drip. Something was moving upstairs with them. Jonas raised a hand, signaling everyone to stay quiet. He moved forward slowly, his revolver steady, boots creaking against the boards. The dripping grew louder, accompanied by a faint, rasping breath. Then a figure stepped into the dim lamplight at the far end of the hallway. It wasn't one of the creatures. It was human, or at least, it used to be. An old man, shirtless, his body paper-thin and mottled with bruises. His jaw hung unnaturally slack, and black ichor streamed from his nostrils. His bare feet left wet prints on the floor, the skin around his toes eaten away, showing bone. Abigail clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Elias muttered under his breath, "What the hell?" The old man's head tilted unnaturally, far, his neck cracking as he stared at them with milky white eyes. Then, without warning, he dropped to all fours and sprinted down the hallway. Jonas fired. The first bullet shattered its shoulder, the second its knee. But it didn't stop. It barreled into Elias, slamming him hard against the wall, jaws snapping wildly. Samuel roared, plunging his knife into the thing's spine. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched sound that made Abigail's ears bleed, then collapsed into spasms. Before going limp, Elias shoved it off, panting, holding his neck where its teeth had grazed. His hand came away smeared with blood. Abigail's voice broke. "What the hell was that?" Crowley answered from the back of the hallway, his voice disturbingly calm despite the chaos. "One of the first to feed. They change. Quickly." Jonas spun on him, fury boiling over. "You son of a bitch! You knew this was gonna happen!" Crowley stepped forward, his expression eerily serene. "I invited it. The earth beneath us has been hungry for years. Tonight it feasts." Samuel lunged for him, but Jonas shoved him back. "We don't have time for this. Barricade ourselves in one of the rooms, now." They ducked into the nearest door, slamming it shut behind them. The room was small, with a single bed and a cracked window. Elias leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Clutching his bleeding neck, Abigail ripped a sheet from the bed, wrapping it tightly around his wound. "Keep pressure on it." Outside, heavy footsteps pounded up the staircase. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as something massive slammed against the upper hallway door. Samuel moved to the window, throwing it open. Below them, the storm raged, the rain soaking the burning roof of the saloon. Flames hissed and screamed as they clashed with the downpour. "We jump," Samuel said flatly. Jonas shook his head. "It's 2 stories, you'll break your damn neck." Samuel turned to face him, his eyes red and glassy. "Better a broken neck than being eaten alive." Before Jonas could respond, a loud crack split the silence. The doorframe shuddered, violently as claws punched through it, curling inward, splintering wood like dry twigs. Abigail screamed, firing blindly into the door. The muzzle flash lit up the room in bursts of orange, each shot revealing the thing outside, hunched, pale, eyeless, its jaw unhinged, teeth slick with fresh blood. It roared, slamming harder against the wood. Jonas turned back to Samuel. "Fine. We jump." They hauled the window fully open, rain hammering the sill, wind tearing through the room. Jonas helped Abigail through first, lowering her as far as he could before letting her drop into the mud below. She landed with a cry but managed to crawl aside. Samuel followed, clutching his knife, his boots slipping on the wet ledge before he leapt. He hit the ground hard, rolling to his knees. Elias hesitated, leaning heavily on the sill. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale from blood loss. "Go," he rasped. Jonas grabbed him. "We're not leaving you, old man." Elias's grip tightened weakly on Jonas's arm. "I ain't making that fall, Jonas. You know it." Before Jonas could argue, the door exploded inward, fragments of wood flying like shrapnel. The creature burst into the room, its claws hooking deep into the bedpost as it dragged itself inside. Elias shoved Jonas toward the window with surprising strength. "Go!" he roared. Jonas hesitated only a moment before leaping out, slamming into the mud below. Abigail screamed his name, scrambling toward him. Elias turned to face the beast, rifle raised, blood dripping from his neck. "Come on, then," he growled, teeth bared. "Ain't dying running." The gun roared, filling the room with fire and smoke. Outside, they heard him scream once, then silence. Jonas staggered up, mud soaking his clothes, rain mixing with blood on his hands. Abigail clung to him, sobbing, as Samuel stared up at the burning saloon, his jaw tight, his knife clenched. From the shattered window above, a pale hand slid into view, dangling lifelessly. Elias was gone. Samuel whispered, almost to himself. "That's 4. Jonas turned sharply. "What?" Samuel's voice was cold, hollow. 4 dead. 8 left. Crowley said 12. Abigail choked back a sob, shaking her head violently. Don't say it like it's some damn prophecy." Jonas looked up at the second floor. Through the rain and smoke, something moved. In the shadows, not one thing but many. And then, faintly from inside the saloon, came the sound of whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping, chanting something in a language none of them knew. The cellar wasn't empty anymore. The rain came down in thick, punishing sheets, stinging their faces as Jonas, Abigail, and Samuel stumbled away from the burning saloon. Mud sucked at their boots, slowing them down, while thunder cracked so violently it rattled their teeth. Jonas turned back, squinting through the storm. The second floor of the saloon was engulfed in flames, the windows glowing orange against the black night, and yet the fire didn't spread outward. It stayed contained, almost as if the building itself was breathing. Abigail collapsed against a fallen fence post, clutching her ribs. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps, each one edged with pain. Jonas knelt beside her, wiping blood from her cheek with the back of his hand. "You all right?" he asked. She shook her head weakly. I can't run anymore." Before Jonas could respond, Samuel dropped to his knees in the mud, hands buried in his hair, rocking back and forth. He didn't look at either of them, just stared at the ground, lips moving silently. Jonas placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sam, talk to me." Samuel finally looked up, his face pale and streaked with rain. "Elias is dead. Clara's dead. Jacob, Miles, all dead." His voice cracked. "And Crowley?" Jonas glanced around, realizing suddenly. "Where the hell is Crowley?" Abigail's eyes widened. He didn't jump. Samuel stood, his jaw tightening. No, that bastard's still inside. Before Jonas could speak, a low sound rolled through the night. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't wind, it was chanting, faint, layered, coming from the saloon. Abigail froze, clutching Jonas's arm. "Do you hear that?" The 3 of them turned toward the building. The firelight inside flickered strangely, pulsing as if matching the rhythm of the chant. Then they saw them, figures, dozens of them, silhouettes moving behind the glowing windows. Samuel whispered, "That's impossible." Jonas shook his head. "No, that ain't possible. Half those people are dead." The figures didn't move like people. Their jerks were sharp, unnatural, like puppets on tangled strings. Limbs bent the wrong way, heads lolled loosely on necks that shouldn't hold them. Abigail covered her mouth, stifling a scream. They're not supposed to be standing." The chanting grew louder. Samuel stepped forward, tightening his grip on the knife in his hand. "Crowley's doing this." Jonas grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "You rush in there, you're dead." Samuel turned on him, his eyes wild. "We're dead anyway." "You think running's gonna save us? It wants us. Whatever the hell this is, it ain't letting us leave." Jonas opened his mouth to argue, then felt something shift beneath his boots. At first, he thought it was just the rain-soaked ground, giving way beneath him, but then he realized the mud was pulling him down. "Sam, Abby, move," he shouted, yanking Abigail to her feet. The three of them staggered backward as the earth rippled, the soaked soil breathing like a living thing. Dark water bubbled up from beneath the surface, smelling of rot and iron. Abigail screamed as a pale hand shot out of the ground, clawing blindly at the air. Then another, then dozens. The graves. They weren't graves anymore. They were openings. Samuel hacked wildly with his knife, cutting through one hand before another grabbed his ankle and yanked him down to his knees. Jonas tackled him, ripping the cold, slimy fingers free, hauling him upright. Abigail fired blindly into the mud, the gunshots muffled by the storm. From beneath the earth, faint voices murmured, not screams, not cries for help, but welcoming whispers. Suddenly, the chanting from the saloon stopped. The silence was worse. Then, through the storm, a single figure emerged from the front doors of the burning saloon. Crowley. His shirt was soaked in blood, his coat torn, his face pale and wet with rain. But his eyes were black, bottomless voids where irises used to be. He walked calmly, barefoot, stepping into the mud as if the chaos around him didn't exist. The earth didn't pull him down like it did the others. Samuel raised his knife, roaring, "You did this!" Crowley smiled faintly, tilting his head. "I invited it, but this was always meant to happen." Jonas aimed his revolver squarely at him. "Start talking, or I swear to God." Crowley ignored the threat. He spread his arms wide, lifting his face to the rain. "Can't you feel it? The land remembers, Jonas, all the blood it drank, all the lies buried beneath it. Tonight. It takes back what it's owed," Abigail shouted, her voice breaking. "You're insane." Crowley turned to her slowly, his expression eerily serene. "No, I'm chosen." Before anyone could move, something exploded behind him. The saloon. Walls buckled outward as beams cracked and glass shattered. A deep, guttural roar rolled out from inside, shaking the ground beneath them. Jonas grabbed Abigail's wrist and yanked her back. "We're leaving, now." But leaving wasn't simple anymore. The saloon moved. The entire structure seemed to expand and contract, like lungs inhaling. The roof shifted, windows twisting into warped shapes, doors slamming open and shut as if the building itself was alive. And from inside, the whispers returned, louder this time, harmonized, chanting a single word over and over in a language none of them knew. Samuel backed up slowly, knife trembling in his hand. "Tell me I'm dreaming, Jonas." Jonas swallowed hard, unable to answer. The front doors slammed open again. Something stepped out. Not human. Not anymore. It had been one of the guests once, its clothes still hanging in wet shreds from its body, but now its skin was pale and stretched, its ribs showing through like knives beneath parchment. Its jaw unhinged with a wet crack as it let out a low, rattling moan. Behind it, more figures poured from the saloon, stumbling into the storm. They weren't running, they were spreading out, circling. Abigail grabbed Jonas's arm, her voice shaking. We can't outrun that." Jonas scanned the tree line, looking for anywhere to go. That's when he saw it, An old barn, half collapsed, maybe 200 yards away. He pointed. There! They ran. The mud tried to swallow their boots, the wind tore at their clothes, and the dead closed in behind them. Jonas fired over his shoulder, the muzzle flash lighting the night in sharp bursts, each shot tearing through one of the shambling figures. But they didn't fall. Samuel grabbed Abigail when she stumbled, hauling her forward, screaming at her to keep running. Behind them. Crowley's voice rose above the chanting. His words carried strangely clearly through the storm. The earth opens for the willing. The debt must be paid. Jonas risked a glance back. The saloon had changed again. It no longer looked like a building. The flames didn't consume it. They fed it. Black veins spread across its walls like roots, pulsing faintly as if drawing power from the corpses rising in the mud. The barn loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible against the darkness. Jonas shoved Abigail through the broken doorway, followed by Samuel. He slammed a rotting beam across the entrance, just as the first of the creatures reached the clearing. Inside, the air was damp and heavy with mold. The wood creaked under their weight, threatening to collapse at any moment. But for now, it was shelter. Abigail collapsed onto the floor, clutching her pistol, sobbing quietly. Samuel paced back and forth, knife still in hand, his breath ragged. Jonas crouched near the doorway, revolver ready, watching the figures gathering outside. Dozens of them now, waiting, silent. And then, far off, from within the saloon came another sound, a heartbeat, deep, slow, inhuman. Jonas whispered, barely audible, "It's alive." The saloon was collapsing around them, the roar of the fire deafening, the heat suffocating. The staircase groaned beneath their boots as Jonas, Abigail, Samuel, and Eli stumbled up, smoke billowing behind them. Clara's body was gone, swallowed by the flames below, and no one had the heart or the strength to speak her name. The creatures below screamed like tortured wind, scraping claws against the floorboards as if chewing through the very foundation. The air was thick with burning whiskey, sweat, and blood. Jonas slammed the second-floor door shut and shoved a dresser against it, his muscles straining as wood splintered under pressure. "This won't hold them long," he rasped, coughing hard. Abigail leaned against the wall, pale and trembling, one hand pressed tight against her wounded leg. How many are there?" Crowley's voice came from the far corner, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. "More than you have bullets for." Samuel rounded on him, blood streaking his face, eyes bloodshot and wild. "You knew this, you son of a bitch. You brought us here." Crowley didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch when Samuel lunged at him, knife raised. Jonas caught Samuel's arm mid-swing, shoving him back hard against the wall. "Save it," Jonas growled, sweat dripping from his beard. "We kill him after we survive." Crowley chuckled softly, the sound maddening in the choking silence. "You think survival's an option? You're still clinging to that?" Eli's rifle clicked empty. He cursed under his breath, loading his last few shells with shaking hands. "Then you better start talking, Crowley, or I swear to God, I'll put a hole in your skull before the monsters do." Crowley tilted his head, his face calm even as sparks rained from the ceiling. 12 deaths, he said softly. "That's the deal. 12 must bleed before they sleep again." Abigail's voice cracked, her breath ragged. "That's insane." Crowley met her gaze, and for the first time there was no smile on his lips, only something darker. "What's insane is believing they'll stop without it." Jonas clenched his fists, his gaze sweeping over the room. "How many are dead already?" Eli's voice was grim. 6. Clara, the fiddler, Hank, Tom, the barkeep, and that traveler in the corner. 6, Jonas muttered. "That means 6 more." Silence fell. Only the crackle of the fire and the distant scraping from below filled the air. Then the door shuddered violently, the dresser jerking forward as claws splintered through the wood. "They're here!" Abigail screamed, dragging herself toward the back wall, her leg useless beneath her. Jonas raised his revolver, Samuel gripped his bloody knife, and Eli took aim with the last of his shells. The door burst inward, sending shards of wood flying. The bay. First creature lunged through, a different one this time, smaller but faster, its body twisted, spine bent at impossible angles. Samuel didn't hesitate. He tackled it to the floor, stabbing furiously, black ichor spraying across his face. Another climbed the walls, its claws ripping through wallpaper as it lunged for Abigail. Jonas fired, blowing its head apart, but the recoil nearly knocked him down. Eli took the third with a perfect shot to the chest, but the bullet barely slowed it. It slammed into him, claws sinking deep into his shoulder. Eli roared in pain, forcing the barrel beneath its jaw and pulling the trigger. The blast tore its skull apart, but Eli collapsed with it, blood pooling fast beneath him. Eli. Abigail crawled to him, sobbing, trying to press her hands against his wounds, but his breaths came shallow and quick. Samuel ripped his knife free from the twitching corpse beneath him, eyes darting wildly around the room. "There's too many. We can't hold them." Crowley stepped forward, untouched, unafraid. "You can't fight them," he said softly, his voice like a hymn. "You can only finish the offering." Jonas turned on him, revolver raised, fury boiling in his veins. "You want 12 dead? Fine." He cocked the hammer. "You're next." Crowley didn't move. "Kill me, and you'll never leave this place alive. Try me." Jonas snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. The ceiling cracked above them, a beam collapsing and crashing to the floor in a storm of fire and splinters. Through the gap, Jonas saw movement. More creatures, crawling along the rafters, their eyeless faces dripping ichor, their claws digging deep grooves into the wood. Abigail screamed. "They're everywhere." One dropped from above, landing on her. She clawed at its face, shrieking, but its jaws locked around her throat. Jonas tackled it, driving his knife deep into its neck, but not before blood sprayed hot across his face. Abigail's eyes rolled back, her body limp in his arms. Samuel froze, staring at her lifeless face, his knife trembling in his grip. "That's 7. Crowley murmured. Jonas roared, slamming Crowley against the wall, his forearm crushing his throat. "I'll kill you." But Crowley smiled through the choke, whispering through gasps, "Do it, or none of you leave." Another crash shook the building as the roof split open, smoke billowing into the black sky. The storm raged above, lightning flashing, illuminating the monsters as they swarmed along the walls and ceiling, closing in from every direction. Eli coughed weakly, his voice barely audible. "Jonas, it's too late." Jonas looked at him, looked at Abigail's body, at the clawed shadows closing in, and something inside him broke. He shoved Crowley toward the center of the room. "You started this," Jonas growled, voice raw. "You end it." Crowley's smile widened, slow and strange, almost peaceful. "Gladly." Before anyone could stop him, Crowley slit his own throat with Samuel's knife. The blood sprayed hot across the floor, and the monsters froze. Every one of them went rigid, heads snapping toward the crimson pool spreading beneath him. Then, one by one, they began to retreat, crawling backward into shadows, down walls, slipping through cracks in the floor until the room fell silent, except for the roar of the fire and the storm outside. Crowley's body twitched once, twice, then stilled, his lifeless eyes staring at nothing. Jonas collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, Abigail's body still in his arms. Samuel sank beside him, knife dangling from his hand, his breath ragged. Eli coughed, blood bubbling at his lips, but he was still alive, barely. The fire climbed higher, devouring the walls. Jonas pulled Samuel to his feet, slinging Eli's arm over his shoulder. Together, they staggered toward the shattered window, glass crunching under their boots. Behind them, the saloon burned like a pyre, the screams of the dead and the whispers of the damned carried on the wind. As they stumbled into the storm, Samuel looked back one last time. Through the smoke and flames, he thought he saw Crowley standing, smiling, his silhouette framed in fire. But when he blinked, there was nothing there.